To finish off our coverage of cookies, I want to show an example of where cookies can really be useful to make a page more useful and punchier. Here, for an example, is a pretty straightforward web page. It's announcing some books, and it covers which ones are most recent. And there's 2 of them. But wouldn't it be nice if there was some way to show off which one a visitor might not have seen before, especially if we could keep track of the last time they'd been to this site? With JavaScript and cookies, we can do that. Let's see how. For those of you with access to the exercise files, we're looking at Chapter 9, Example 7, script.html. There's a couple of things going on here. The first is there is a style tag, style rule here, with p.newImage. If a paragraph has the class newImage, then we add 35 pixels of padding on the left. We give the paragraph a background image of a little new image of a GIF called new, which just says the word new. And we set background repeat to no repeat. That way, via JavaScript, we can set the new image class on certain paragraphs, some paragraphs but not others, and automatically the new will display. And if at some point later on we change what's in that graphic, all our pages automatically update. What's interesting down here in the body is that each of these paragraphs has an ID. And that ID is new dash and then a date in 4-digit year, month, day format. So you can see this stores when each of these books was released. So now we have to compare these dates to the last visited dates. And that's done in script.js, which we're starting off with most of the code that we've had previously. So here we are. The one difference really is because now we're just working with dates, I've changed the cookie val function. Instead of returning a 0 if it's not found, it's now returning 1 January 1970. For a variety of reasons, this is JavaScript's beginning date. If you go back to the beginning of time in JavaScript, it's for January 1st, 1970. So init page is run when the page is first loaded. And between now and expire date, we want to keep track of when they last visited. So we set that to be a new date, and we pass it in a value. So we do it all in one step. We pass in the value cookie val page visit. If we've been here before, that will automatically get popped into our last visited date. If we haven't been here before, cookie val returns January 1st, 1970, and that's what gets stored in last visit. So it will say that everything is new, which it should be for somebody who hasn't been here before. Now, after we set document.cookie, we want to set one other value. We're going to create a new var called all graphs, which are all the paragraphs on the page. So it goes and looks for document.get elements by tag name P. So we're looking for every paragraph tag on the page, and that's what's stored inside all graphs. So it's an array of all the paragraphs. After we do that, we want to loop through them. So we say for var I equals 0, I less than all graphs dot length I plus plus if we want to check and see if all graphs sub I dot ID, remember we looked at the ID of what paragraphs look like, dot index of new dash. They all started with new, if you recall. If index of is not equal to -1, so in other words, we found the text NEW dash inside the ID of this paragraph, then we want to call a new routine we're about to write called new check and pass it all graphs sub I, comma, all graphs sub I dot id dot substring 4. That means we're going to pass not just the entire paragraph itself, but also the bit of the ID that contained the date. So it's everything from character 4 on to the end. And character 4 is actually, well, it's the 5th character of the string. So we're basically dropping off NEW dash. And that's what goes here. Now we need to write our function newcheck. And there's a lot of code in this, so I'm going to copy and paste this in a couple of steps. Here we're inside newcheck, and we've added a few variables, but we also want to add in our parameters that are being passed. So there's graph, element, and date string. So we start off, we're setting up a variable y. That's just a reminder this is a 4-digit year. And we call parseInt, which looks for the integer part of a string. And it's looking at date string and getting the substring of the first 4 characters. So if it was 2006, it would be 2006. And there's a second parameter here to parseInt that we haven't seen before, and I'll cover that in a moment. So gets substring of 4 through 6 of date string, and DD gets a substring 6 through 8 of date string. And that then is the month and the day part of the field. Now you need 10 on here because parseInt actually does a little bit more than we've talked about before. It can take a string and parse it out into an integer, but that integer can be in different bases. If you're giving it a 4-digit number, it's usually fine, unless the 4-digit number is something that it can get confused with, say, binary or a hexadecimal or octal. And in certain cases, that can happen here when we're looking at these 2-digit numbers. So we're putting a comma 10 on there, which says to parseInt, and we want it in base 10, which is what we want to usually deal with. So that forces it to all be in regular decimal numbers. And then we set our last variable, last changed, which is a new date object with the year, month minus 1, and the day. We're subtracting 1 from the month because JavaScript years are 1 relative, JavaScript days are 1 relative, but JavaScript months are 0 relative. And yes, that is very odd. If you take the current year and the current day and subtract 1 from the month, you will have today. It's not extremely clear. So now we're going to paste in the remainder of newcheck. Here's our last part of newcheck. So what we're looking at is if last changed, remember that was all these figures here were based on getting the date off of the paragraph on the page itself. If we quickly go back to the HTML page, you can see that this is a date that is embedded in the HTML. And here's another date embedded in the HTML. Back in our JS field, that's going to be turned into a date called last changed. So you want to see if lastchanged.getTime is after lastvisit.getTime. Lastvisit.getTime is when we last visited this page. If it's changed since our last visit, then we say, does the paragraph currently have a class name? If it doesn't, we set the class name to be newImage. If it does currently have a class name, we set the class name to be newImage and then append on what was there previously. And here's cookie val, it stayed the same. And now we're going to go over to our browser and run it. Here was the plain web page before. And now, because one of these dates is in the future, it says that this book is new to us. If we go back to example 5, which was the cookie deletion routine, have it delete the cookies, and then go back to this page and reload it, it says that both of them are new to us. If we reload it again, it says only the latter is. So in this way, it's being highlighted. It's being brought to our attention what's new, and that's done by storing the value in cookies.